The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone. We're just going to give everybody else a couple, just maybe one more minute to join before we begin. Thank you for joining us today.
Oh. Yeah, I've woken up. I'm getting onto the call now. Oh.
Okay, let's get started, everyone. Hello. Thank you for joining us today. We have two exciting and experienced presenters speaking on their experience and work with street-connected children in Uganda. This is the first webinar in a 4-part series showcasing the localized interventions, research, and bringing evidence to practice in the development of interventions that are critical for the protection of vulnerable children. I'm going to have Alfred from AfriChild introduce himself. Maybe we lost Alfred. Timothy, would you like to tell us a little bit of AfriChild and the work that you do in Uganda?
Thank you very much, Evelyn. I do hope that you can hear me. Can you just confirm that you can hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you very much once again. And it's a privilege to be able to be part of this webinar today. I send greetings to each and everybody who has been able to log in. And I'd like to thank you for sparing your time to be able to join us in sharing thoughts and being part of this very important discussion today. My name is Timothy Opobo, and I am the Executive Director of the AfriChild Center. The AfriChild Center is based out of Makerere University in Kampala, Uganda, and we are a multidisciplinary research center that really focuses on, that does really child-focused research. And our objective is to generate evidence that helps inform practice and policy. Ultimately, our vision is to really make a contribution to the well-being of the child through the research that we do. But we also work to try to build in-country capacity through research training for young researchers, and also use the information that we have to do advocacy to influence some of the practices and the policies that are done towards the well-being of children. So it's a privilege to have very experienced presenters, Dr. Faminas Mugumya and Damon, who are associates of AfriChild, and you'll hear more about who they are. I welcome you to this discussion, and once again, thank you very much for joining us. We look forward to a very fruitful and enlightening discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Timothy. So we will begin with Dr. Mugumya, our first presenter. He is a professional social worker teaching at the Department of Social Work and Social Administration at Makerere.
Okay.
Oh, hi, Alfred.
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, go. You can present Dr. Mugumya. It seems we're having trouble connecting with Alfred, so I'm going to continue. Dr. Mugumya is a professional social worker teaching at the Department of Social Work and Social Administration at Makerere University in Kampala, Uganda. Previously, he served as a graduate programs coordinator and an undergraduate programs coordinator at the department. He holds a PhD in community development systems governance from the School of Law and Government in Dublin City University and a Master of Arts degree in Development Studies with a specialty in local and regional development from the Erasmus International Institute of Social Studies in the Netherlands. He has a strong teaching and research interest in community social work and its related specialties in family and child protection, community development, and social change. Thank you, Dr. Mugumya, for joining us today.
Thank you, Evelyn, for the nice and kind introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. And I think for those in Uganda, good morning. I want to welcome everyone. Hello, everyone. I'm happy to be here to be part of this webinar and to speak about one of the many research activities that the AfriChild has coordinated. I want to begin just in the interest of time to go straight to the presentation. We know that violence against children in Uganda is recognized as an urgent dilemma. However, we also know that most research has been largely conducted quantitatively and often has not included or involved children in the research process that generates a range of results and messages that would inform practice. So we also know that there are multiple forms of violence against children in Uganda, and these have been confirmed by the recent National Violence Against Children survey, which was also coordinated by the AfriChild Center in mid-2018, whose report is actually available online. And so we are looking at a research program that contributes to the ongoing research strategy on exploring pathways out of adversity for the children, and also to complement through qualitative research on the national survey, which was mainly quantitative, to address some of the categories of children who were partially not included in this study. So this qualitative research, whose findings I will present this afternoon or today, is looking at those categories of children who were somehow not included in the national survey, and these children were children who fell below the age of 12. So we have this qualitative research focusing on children between 0 and 12 years, and then also largely focusing on children outside of the family setting who were partially not targeted in the national survey. So we hope that we will present research processes and methods that will contribute to the evidence based on the key drivers of children's risk and resilience using this case in Uganda. Next. So in terms of methodology, therefore, this qualitative research mainly utilized participatory methods. And so here we have an outline of what we did. We did about 35 field diaries. We did semi-structured and cartographic interviews with about 52 participants. Autophotography and place perception, and I will explain some of these methods later. And then focused group discussions, and then the future search workshop, which was conducted with about 10 children from all the subgroups that I've mentioned above. Yeah, but before everything happened, we ensured that we worked with the children who were transitioning off the street. Maybe the next slide, Evelyn. And to be able to do this, we had to partner with, I think we had to partner with some of the organizations that are already involved in this kind of work. And we identified 4 youth, 2 girls and 2 boys to act as researchers. So we are talking about working with children to design and even including selecting methods for data collection based on the settings that they were quite familiar with. So we had to go through a lot of discussion with them. The intentions about what kind of research we wanted to do and the settings in which we are going to do this research were key areas of discussion. And because we wanted to balance gender, we had to have a group of boys and then a group of girls. And that's the reason we had the 4 peer researchers, 2 young men and then 2 ladies to participate in the research. So we had street-connected children targeted between 5 and 17 years as our study group, sexually exploited children and children in positive transition, and then child domestic workers constituting our study population. And this was actually developed or generated together with the other peer researchers that we worked with. So before we went into meeting these categories of groups, we had so much time spent interacting, immersing ourselves together into a group of researchers to form a community of researchers, university-based and or professional researchers working with these people who understood or who knew the setting in which we are going to research. So we had a range of activities. From this photograph, you could see at one point, the team went to the beach to interact, to feel free, to connect and become one, discuss informally and also ask questions, understand what is it that is going to be done, address expectations. And that took us about more than 1 month or 2. At some point we took some time off, but again, we had to come back to meet again and renew our interaction before we could set up to start the data collection. So based on existing literature, we say that these kinds of child-centered methods seek to create space for diverse, localized ways of naturally communicating meaning. The children, we believe, on the street understand the street life or street setting, dynamics, complexities far better than any researcher that would come from the university claiming to understand this kind of setting. So we give them the respect, we give them our ears, they help us understand those settings very well. And then we agree that we are going to work with them to learn together and to document their experiences and the experiences of their peers. So we had a lot of learning, a lot of reflection together with these children. They would ask questions, they would advise, and so we had to take time. And this really became the main center of the philosophy behind qualitative research and participatory or child or youth-driven participatory action research approaches that have been promoted for some time. Next slide. Evelyn, we could move a little faster. And so these pictorially, these are some of the activities that working together with our research team, the youth researchers that we worked with, were able to generate quite a lot of data in form of pictures, in form of the activities that the children are involved in, and then we'll come back and discuss the meanings of these activities and relate them to the life, relate them to violence, And then we conducted activity mappings with the two different groups. The categories were female and male, to be able to see whether there would be some differences in terms of the violence and resilience measures that the children take for the girls and for the boys, because they also experience the street differently. So there are gendered activities, but also gendered resilience and violence forms that would easily capture when we have these discussions gendered as well. And so what you see is a discussion between the children discussing the activities they had drawn, and again using these pictures and illustrations to go deeper into semi-structured interviews, because they drew maps that were based on what they experienced while they're on the street. And then we had to come back and sit and listen to what they meant from the pictures, from the diagrams that they drew. And then we took notes of these. And then again, we read out these notes to confirm that this is what exactly they meant, to keep the children participating fully and informing decisions within the research process that is about their lived experiences. Next. This is the same semi-structured interview, this time showing the two groups, one interview with a young man between our team and the child that was identified with the help of the other children, because they knew these children, so they could easily take us to where they were and to be able to recruit those that would participate in the interviews. And we had this other category in a focus group discussion, the category of sexually exploited girls. It wouldn't have been possible to easily find participants in such a focus group discussion if it were not for the participation of the children in this research as researchers, identifying those that they knew and creating an environment of trust that they are known, so they can be invited in a meeting to share, and they know also what kind of issues that they are going to share, and they are sure also that this kind of research is intended to create an opportunity for learning that would inform practices or engagements or activities geared towards addressing the plight of these girls. Again, this is another focus group discussion with domestic workers, especially the boys, who again were also recruited in the same way, and they felt comfortable, they trusted the research process, and they opened up freely about their experiences in this sector of domestic work. Next. One of the very interesting methods that we used was orthophotography. And this method was primarily helpful in children being able to take photographs of places they considered unsafe, and then those that they considered safe, and then from which then we would have discussions in terms of these children helping us to understand the meanings of these photographs. So this was a key approach. The children would go with the cameras together with the other team members that were recruited through the Africa Center and Makerere University to take photographs, and then would have to print these photographs and then have discussions over these photographs. This is one of the discussions that were about the kinds of pictures that the children took. The place perception. Is this place safe? This place is not safe, and is not safe in this and the other way. So they're able to go and take photographs of places where some of the children are arrested, where some of the children are beaten, and then photographs of places where they find comfort on the street. So they chose, according to how they felt, which pictures they had to take. And then we also had the Future Search workshop, where we had about 10 children, as I said at the beginning. And this is about resilience. How is the future going to be? How are the children looking at their future? Is it still full of violence? Is it full of means of surviving or resilience, overcoming the dangers that they have lived with? What are the obstacles to getting through the dangers that they have been used to? Who is a friend? And what they think needs to be done? And a lot of recommendations, a lot of issues again were underpinned in this that also came through other methods of research to be able to give us a perfect context that we can describe as the lived experience of children who have been on the street, who find the street as their home, and what they expect to be done to be able to have a peaceful interaction with the street by communicating quite a lot of messages to different stakeholders. Next. So as mentioned earlier, of course, we went through also participatory data analysis methods, and we used quite a number of methods to be able to generate the evidence, including mapping of some of those places that children identified as safe or unsafe. And then we also used in vivo 11, and to develop the code book, which we used to analyze the rest of the data. Again, this we did together with the children that we worked with, trying to find meanings of different concepts, meanings of different terminologies that were used, whether these are concepts that imply violence or whether they imply safety, and the different stakeholders, the different actors on the streets that the children interact with, what they do at the different times, where they go when life is very hard, who gives them help, who doesn't. So we did all of this with them, and we generated a code book, which we used again to prepare the report and to prepare the findings that help us to understand the nature of life on the street through the eyes of the children themselves, through their own experiences. So having gone through the participatory research rigorous process that we had to go with to do this research from the framework of democratic research and participatory research methodologies, we are happy to share some of the findings, and the findings are clearly what the children were able to generate themselves as the state of violence and how they find or look for resilience to be able to survive on the street. So we found out that the key triggers for leaving home, because we're talking about children on the street, children who are out of the family setting, some of the triggers, the key ones being related to parenting, the living conditions within homes, of course, also the peer pressure, and then the child trafficking. These were identified as the key triggers that result into children leaving home. Children are given away in child trafficking, but they do not know why they have to be given to some people to go and do some jobs, and then eventually they are exploited while they are doing work in those kinds of settings. Then there is the living conditions, which were not good. And through some of the interviews, we were able to capture some of the direct experience of the children, talking about where they were coming from, like in this quote. Life in the life in the village was very, very difficult. It was infected. I was infected with diggers. And the village was always tormented by rebels who raided homes in the night to demand for different items. We would surrender everything to them in order to save our lives. And this was the very reason why I left the village and came this way. And when I came, I was told about the street, so I started begging. So see, it's a whole line of difficult situations that compel the children to go. But they are also beaten, like you see from that illustration. The children are beaten by their caregivers, and so they move to the street because they expect the street to be a better home. And that means a lot for everyone who may have different meanings and interpretations around a child who is on the street. The children are looking at the street as their home, and because they are finding safety and comfort on the street. So there's that attraction. And of course, they communicate with their peers who go on the street. And so they think the street is a better place for them than their homes. Similarly, some of the children who have either been in conflict with the law, but also other children who have been taken to residential care institutions, they had stories to mention about what happens in those settings in institutions, and which actually forces or triggers their escape to go on the street. One is torture. The children are subjected to a lot of torture. And some of them also fail to adapt because they have been on the street, they have been taken to institutions, but within institutions, there are also regulations that they cannot stand. There are expectations that these children will stop immediately consumption of drugs, for example. That's what they said. And so they run away because they can't manage to suddenly stop using drugs. There's overcrowding, there's again poor nutrition, just like it was for the homes. And then of course they have a lot of unexpected, unmet expectations, which they mention where they go to these institutions, but they think they're going to find better life, and time goes on and they don't see anything. So they find means to run away from the institution. So you find that institutions are not their home. Their homes have already not been their homes. So what happens on the street? So what happens on the street to them is conceived again as an attack on their space. So all the violence that they go through is actually, again, something they don't expect because they think there is freedom on the street. So why then should they be tortured when they're on the street? So these are the kinds of questions that they would ask, and these are the kinds of the clues they would give related to what's happening in these other places. But again, they also agree again, and based on their experiences, that the street is not any better even when they run there. There's lack of proper shelter. That's what you can easily see. And then the children are forced to stay and sleep in dirty and open places. So this is what happens. This is where they expect friendly home, but again, there are also problems. With lack of access to water, they do not have soap, bathing, and toilet facilities. So they're also exposed to all sorts of diseases, including tetanus, because they get injuries through broken bottles. They walk bare feet. So there are lots of problems on the street, which they have actually conceived as their home. But amidst all these, the children seem to actually believe that it is safer for them to stay on the street because they are free. They have the freedom, but they are also attacked. When the children fall sick, there's limited access to medication, most especially when treatment that is prescribed is not available in government facilities where they could perhaps access them for free. Next.
Yes. Dr. Mugunya, can I just give you a time check? It is 4:29.
Oh, I think we're almost there, Evelyn.
Yeah.
Yeah, so through the mapping of safe and unsafe places, I think majority of the people here may not really be familiar with these places, but you can find them on the map. These are places in Kampala, and some of them appear in the photographs. And this is the mapping of safe and unsafe places that we're able to capture using the GIS, also based on this participatory discussion with the children, just to make it much more pictorial, safe and unsafe places. So we could make decisions on the safety of the children based on such illustrations that are generated through participatory research methods. Next, Evelyn. Evelyn, next. Okay, so in addition, of course, this is just, again, the other problem that the children go through, the substance abuse. They do this because they are trying to survive. So it's a coping mechanism. There's also sexual violence, which I talked about. Boys are sodomized, the girls are gang raped, and then they are beaten. All these are the different forms that I mentioned that the children go through, and these are coming from their own voices. They mention the armed personnel who are supposed to be keeping peace, law, and order, but attack them. They find them in their friendly spaces and attack them from there. Some girls who are gang raped, and they mention this directly. They could easily mention that the officers treat them as if they're going to protect them, but they go on and rape them. And all of this happens without any form of safety precautions that the girls have. Next. Who are the perpetrators? Again, from this participatory research, the police, armed and unarmed. Then we have step parents, step mothers. All of these came out, and these were ranked high in our discussions with them, the mechanics, the peers. Some of these are the people that they meet the interface with on the street, and the others that actually prompted or forced them to leave. The employers of child domestic workers, the city authority personnel, and also community members, general community members, singling out taxi drivers and especially personnel in the transport sector. So who knows who is a problem to the children? The children themselves are able to identify these children when we work with them through the research processes that allow them to participate in many ways. I think we're almost coming to the end. The forms of resilience, how do they go through to survive on the street? They have received a lot of support from NGOs, from faith-based agencies, by giving them food, entertainment, and sometimes shelter or counseling. They have given them some vocational skills. They participate in picking and selling of scrap or plastics, and then also receive medical support from the health facilities. This is what gets closer to surviving on the street. But for some of the positively transited children who are almost off the street, who still are connected to the street, they have challenges. They have made up their minds to leave, but they can't completely settle in these settings because they lack what it takes to settle down. For instance, if it is about their accommodation, or if it's about to have some stable income or improve their income, they are still struggling, and oftentimes they are compelled to again go back, recede, and they are on and off. So there is still a challenge for them to get out completely. So the risk is still there. They understand the risk, but they still have to go because they are prompted, they are pushed to go. And so one main theme for this presentation, or the theme for this webinar series is then, are we doing the right thing? So what are we doing? Are we, who will protect the children? Just raising questions, but from the research, we learned that it's important to strengthen community-based systems for the protection, for the care of the children. And this is perhaps going to be ranked highest going forward, because this is where everything happens. There are communities where children live. If they have to run out from their homes, the homes are in community settings where there are child protection structures. When they go on the street, there are also child protection structures. So this research just only tells us that it is very, very important to focus on strengthening systems at the community level where children are, whether it is in their homes where the violence is highest, even according to the National Violence Against Children Survey, that has to be done. It's important to focus on parenting, but also it's important to look at the systems around the children, the service providers, the neighborhoods, the leaders, and so on. This will go with sensitization on good parenting practices. It will also go with legislation and enforcement of legislation, including prosecution of perpetrators once they are identified, provision of more gender-sensitive education, particularly targeting the girls to make sure they stay in school. And then the question is, who is going to enforce this? Rehabilitate, reconcile, and resettle children. If this can be an alternative, so we are looking at many approaches, multiple approaches coming in to address this problem. Banning recruitment of children as domestic workers and enforcing tough laws on offenders and punishments on offenders. And then again, talking to the employers of domestic workers. Some of them, even after they have grown over 18 years, still go through a lot of violence. They are considered important, but they are not treated as important people in settings where they work. So going back to the key issue here is that I think it would be very important that from this research we learn the importance of building strong communities, building strong settings for children, whether it is on the street. And this requires a lot of community engagement, which is not just going to happen in maybe a project framework, but it requires long-term research, long-term service delivery, and long-term discussions that will build strong relationships between and among the different stakeholders that have the potential to provide care for the children.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mugunya.
Thank you very much.
We will be holding questions to the end. If you can just join us a little bit after the hour so we can get some questions into our wonderful presenters. Okay. Now we have Damon Lamara serving as the Country Director for Dwelling Places, a Christian non-governmental organization that works in Uganda with street-connected children and children from high-risk families. During his tenure at the helm of the organization, over 1,800 children have been rescued and reintegrated back into their families and into school to receive informal and formal skills. He has been working with children and families for the last 10 years in the areas of HIV/AIDS, prevention and treatment, family empowerment, child trafficking prevention, curtailing child labor, curbing child separation, and in advocacy at the grassroots, national level, and international level. He is an ethics and developmental studies graduate from one of Africa's best missionary universities, Uganda Martyrs University, emerging as a development worker and social worker. Thank you, Damon, for joining us today.
Thank you very much for having us on. And it's a privilege to give a comment after that presentation, the research that was done. And I guess my role is to just share about being in the practice of working with these children on the streets, what it means for us. Next slide, please. First of all, I'll just give a hint on who we are as an organization. Dwelling Places is a Christian-based organization that works at rescuing, rehabilitating street children and abandoned babies from high-risk families. And it was started in 2002 by Rita and William Nkemba. Next slide. Those are the founders of the organization. Our vision is simple. We are looking at having a society where every child has a chest to rest their head on and a place to call home. A chest is a place of comfort. The head is where everything flows and comes forth, and then the place to call home, home safety, home protection, and everything. And we know it is possible. Next slide. As an organization, we have, right from inception, we have worked with over 1,800 children who have directly passed through our family, our homes, two rehabilitation centers that we run. But we have reached more than 7,000 children out there in our sensitization and prevention activities. Next slide. What is the status of the children living on the streets? For very many years, UNICEF and many other organizations reported that Uganda had over 10,000 children, children living on the streets. But a remuneration report by RETRAC and the government Ministry of Gender, Labour, Social Development and RETRAC has shown that in just 4 districts of Kampala, Jinja, Uganda, and Mbale, there are over 15,000 children who are living and working on the streets. This does not include other urban areas that we now know have an increased number of children like Lira, Gulu, Barara, and many other districts where we know that there are more children living on the streets. The numbers are not known, but in 15,000 children are living on the streets. And this is in 2017, and we're in 2020. So the numbers have either gone up or gone down. Next slide. What are the different forms of exploitation? Some of them have already been mentioned by the doctor. And just to highlight a few of them, the major ones that we come across, one is forced begging for income, where the children are pushed to come to the streets to beg. Then there's sexual exploitation. Doctor has already emphasized and talked about how that is experienced. Then there's also trafficking for organ and also child sacrifice. Children are trafficked, and they are very good candidates for organ harvesting and also child sacrifice. After all, no one is going to follow up on these children. They don't belong to anyone on the street. No one is monitoring them. It's easy for them to be taken and to be trafficked for their organs. Then there's also cheap labor, and their doctors ably emphasized and talked much about that. The home house boys and house girls and the scrap collection and all that. These children are very cheap. They're affordable compared to the adults. Next slide. What are some of the abuses that we have come across and have seen happen in our line of work with these children? One is that the children who are on the streets are not part of the census. They are not part of the census, therefore they are not planned for. Under the NDPs, whether it was 1, 2, or 3, they have not been planned for. They are not part of the census, and if they're not part of the census, then Ministry of Finance cannot plan for them. There is no financing that can go towards them. That is a challenge on its own. Therefore, they cannot receive any services whatsoever. They're nowhere in the plan, in the National Development Plan. Then also children are used for labor. We have heavily had conversations on that, deliberations on that. There are brutal arrests of the children, and also doctor has mentioned that. And children are held in prison, in the cells, in the police cells for more than 24 hours, which is against already the law stipulated when children should be presented if there are any cases. In December 2019, 32 children, an example of that is in December 2019, 32 children were arrested and were committed for a charge on offense of common nuisance, which was even repealed. They're given useless commitments, and these don't hold at all. Then also the police, who are the main complainants, don't turn up in court to testify. They'll be the main complainant. The child is taken to court, then remanded, then taken to court again, and then remanded until the magistrate has to throw out the case because the main complainant is not coming forth. So the child doesn't get their justice in time. Next slide. The probation officers are also not a part of the processes, whatsoever the case might be. The probation officers are there to ensure that the children are represented and are protected. This for us is very important because the probation officers by law are the ones who are to stand in for the child. And if they're not there, then their right is being abused of representation in court. The probation officers are not there to ensure that they are protected and their rights are fully attained or realized. Children also continue to complain about the local enforcement officers, how they're brutally beaten and how money is taken away from them and how they continue to struggle with enforcement. They cannot go to the police to protect them because the police are part of the problem. They're part of the violators of their rights. And Dr. also mentioned more about that. Next slide. There are also not enough rehabilitation centers for specifically these children who are on the streets. There's no government facility that is there that is for these children. Like Doctor has mentioned, that the children go there and they are instead violated. These children who are on the streets are not necessarily children in conflict with the law. Not all of them are in conflict with the law, and therefore they are not even supposed to be in the centers. The only rehabilitation center we have in Uganda is Camping Rehabilitation Center, and it was built and set up for mainly children who are in conflict with the law. This means that they do not have the ability to receive the rehabilitation services at the government level. Most of the rehabilitation is done by CSOs and NGOs. Then the children are victims of trafficking, and that we have already seen: commercial sex exploitation, forced begging, and many others. Next slide. According to the VAC report 2019, Doctor already mentioned domestic violence at home, which is where the children are beaten and are tortured or are given work that is really beyond their means. According to the 2019 VAC report, the homes were seen as the place where children are most violated. And in some of the interactions with the children will tell you that we feel safer on the street than at home. Even when you're rehabilitating them and preparing them for home, they'll tell you, no, I'll go back to the street and go home, because at home I am tortured, I am suffering. When do we get to a state where a child feels the street is safer than the home? That is a big challenge for all of us. Next slide. Next slide. What are we doing about it as dwelling places? What are our interventions? What can we do? How do we handle the situation of children? We do rescue, rehabilitation, reconciliation, and resettlement. And in rescue, we go to the streets. We have social workers who go to the streets, create rapport with children, and are able to convince the children that the streets is not where they should be. And we then invite them to come off the streets. Other times, children are also rescued by KCCA and other enforcement officers, and they are brought off the streets and they're taken to our home. Next slide. So in our home, the children are able to receive rehabilitative services. And this is a holistic service of temporary shelter, food, catch-up education, medical care, counseling, emotional, and all the other support that can end up building even the child's well-being, that they can even build resilience, that when we end up resettling them back to their homes, to their families, they will build the resilience and they will not resort to coming back to the streets at any one time. So we have 2 rehabilitation centers in Mutundwe, in Kampala Mutundwe, and in Bulova Wakiso district. Next slide. And during the rehabilitation services, that's why we have, those are the different services that we offer: catch-up education, mealtime, and also spiritual care. Next slide. During the rehabilitation is when we are able to do tracing and we're able to collect information. Now the children, like Doctor said, these children are able to lead us back to their families. Many people ask me, how do we get these children to go back to their families? These children actually are the ones who give us the information after rehabilitation and counseling. They're able to give us information, and we're able to do reconciliation. We take the children, we do tracing, reconcile the family, whatever issue made the child leave the home. Next slide. Whatever issue made the child leave the home, it helps bring the family. We deal with it and make sure the child is back. Despite what many people think about the families not wanting the children, or the children are a nuisance and have been a bad at home, those are some photos that can show you a beautiful reintegration process where the family has received their children and they thought that their children were dead and were nowhere. Now you can see a reconciliation happening there. And once the family is deemed safe, we then are able to resettle the child back to the family's life. Now, as a way of sustainability on ensuring that the child does not come back to the streets, we offer educational services. We ensure that the children are placed in school, and that just gives you an idea of what number of children we have in school and we're supporting. We have found that 95% of the children we have rescued and worked with have not come back to the streets. For us, the success has not been in anything else but ensuring that these children are in school and are able to be protected and provided for in the school. Next slide. Family empowerment. Remember, Doctor mentioned that poverty is one of the push factors, the way they were at home and what was happening, the lack of meals and all that. It is important that we deal with the push factors also. We cannot just remove the children or rescue the children from the streets and take them back into the same state that they came from. It is just going to have them come back to the streets. So we need to empower the families to be able to protect, to be able to provide, and to be able to give the services to the children, or to ensure that the children receive the education and everything else. And so family empowerment is very key for us in ensuring the sustainable resettlement of a child happens. Next slide. Child participation, like Doctor mentioned, child participation is very key also for us, that the children are empowered to speak for themselves. The time has gone where we think that we should always be the one to speak for the children. The children themselves can speak. And so what we have done is to come with the children who have been on the streets, the survivors, who have gone through the trafficking and have gone through the child labor and all that, and have gone through rehabilitation, are back in school, are back at home. We empower them to be the voice for those who are still on the streets, to be the voice for those who are suffering and are yet to be on the streets. Let's remember that any child, including your child and my child, can end up going onto the street. So these are the empowered to be the voice for those voiceless. Next slide. That is still showing you where the children come up with what their needs are. They are able to identify them, and they're able to advocate for them from the local council and all the different levels. That is empowering them to be able to speak for themselves and are able to identify what their needs are. Next slide. That also shows the use of advocacy by the children through music, dance, or drama, where they're able to share with their parents what they feel. It needs to be addressed in their household. Like I mentioned, parenting is one of the gaps. And you'll be surprised when you give the children a theme and they come up with their own address, their own issues they want to bring out. They just do it in a fantastic manner, unedited, just the child themselves coming up with it. Next slide. Advocacy is very key, and partnerships and creating awareness is very key. We need to be able to amplify the voices of the children, and this is very essential for us to pass on the message that the children are having, that the children have to share. Next slide. What needs to be done? These are my last slides. What we think that needs to be done, some of the gaps that are there, we think as an organization that government needs to come up with holistic programs that are well funded to be able to address the issues of children living on the streets. And they should concentrate a lot on prevention activities. As the saying has always been, prevention is better than cure. We need to ensure that we have prevention, and the reintegration is holistic. We also need to close down the areas where we know that the children are being exploited. These areas need to be closed down. The chimasolos, the chimasolos are the nude shows where girls are engaged in nude shows and all that. We need to close down these areas that are known for exploitation, because these are the areas where the children will end up seeking to go, where it will be abused. Then we need to also arrest and prosecute the persons who are behind the trafficking and exploiting of the children. Next slide. We need to also concentrate a lot on setting up the safeguards back at home to ensure that we are keeping the homes, we're keeping the communities and the societies safe and secure from influencing the children to come and live. The poverty levels and all that, we need to ensure that the community, the local councils and all that are ensuring that the children are protected at home. We need to ensure that there are safeguards, the champions, the community, the pro bono social workers that are in the community, the child protection committees. We need to ensure that they're up and running and they're able to follow through whatever was committed. The local council vice chairperson who is in charge of the children affairs, that they're able to capture and arrest the situation at the source rather than them coming to the streets. And also when we resettle these children, that these groups of people are able to also help us protect and follow up on the children that are taken back home. Then finally, one of the last things that I'll say is that we also need to encourage Ministry of Gender, Labour and Social Development to commit to the UN Agreement number 21 on children living in street situations, which, next slide, which talks about which provide with the authoritative guidance on how to ensure that the children who are on the streets, their human rights are protected, and that the children who are on the streets receive every service like any other ordinary child. We need to ensure that Ministry of Gender can sign up to that, can agree, because this is in line with the Convention of the Rights of the Child. And this is very important for us to push the government to commit to. This general comment is like, let me say, it's like the master law when it comes to the issues concerning children living on the streets. Next slide. Next slide. Thank you very much. I think that is it. And all I can say is that we need to do everything possible to ensure that we protect our children. That photo there shows you a picture of children who are picking through the garbage. And how I usually end my presentations is by telling people that we need to do everything to ensure our children are protected, because if we don't, our child might end up in such a situation. And God forbid that any of our children find the street safer than their homes. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Damon, so much. I want to take this moment to ask some questions. We've gotten a lot of really thoughtful ones from the audience. And if I could just ask for people to stay a little bit longer so we can at least get one question for each presenter. Damon, this question is for you. We have someone wondering if you could share some reflections about the situation of children in the street in the context of COVID.
Thank you very much. The situation of children on the streets with COVID has been quite a unique and challenging situation. First of all, the source of the children's meals and everything were from the restaurants, were from selling the scrap, and from begging from the vehicles that are passing by. Now with the COVID, the lockdown having happened in Uganda, many of us know that there was a lockdown, a total lockdown. The children had no source of meals and no source of revenue to be able to provide for themselves. On top of that, there was the curfew issue that was that we had, where we are all supposed to be home by 7 o'clock. And when you talk about the children at home, their home is the verandas of the shops, at the taxi park, and in the slummy areas. Now the police come to enforce that directive that the curfew is there. The children are beaten. The children are pushed. The children, there was a lot of violations. The children were beaten. One was even beaten into coma, and lucky enough did not pass away, came out of hospital. Another one who was running away from the police was run over by a vehicle that was also trying to run away from the police, that was also trying to stop them, and the child broke their foot. These are just some of the simple situations that are there. But I'm happy that when we engaged the government, that the government also did, through the Kampala City Council, set up a center where the children, a quarantine center where the children willingly came. We had 200 children who willingly, they came on their own. They came into the center and they were ably provided for. And as we speak right now, 180 children have been placed in different homes after being tested, and they are corona-free or COVID-free. They don't have the virus and are now receiving care. Similar situation, similar isolation centers were set up in Mbale. I'm told one was set up in Mbale and in Gulu by still the COVID task force and the teams there. But there were many other children. We're talking about 200 children who were placed in this quarantine center. But remember, Kampala alone has over 4,000 children who are living and working on the streets. So something was done, but not a lot was done. Not everything possible was done to protect. These children were definitely very much so vulnerable and at risk. And we only are grateful that we could do so much for the few that we had, but we're thinking about the rest that are not part of the 200.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you, Damon. Dr. Mugumya, we have a question here for you regarding the photographs during the research process. How did you ensure this was safe, a safe activity, particularly thinking about the unsafe locations? Would this create suspicion by others? And what were the considerations around risk and consent?
Thank you, Evelyn. Yes, we took due consideration for the risks that were involved in taking photography for the unsafe places. And so what we did was to encourage the children not actually necessarily to take photographs of clearly maybe security arresting or beating up anybody, but the geographical spaces where they knew such activities actually quite often happened. But also they moved with our street connected researchers, the peer researchers, who guaranteed that they would follow some of these guidelines to maintain their safety. So that way we ensured that the activities did not endanger them in any way.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mugumya. And if I could just close out with one more question, because I think this is important to both in research and in interventions, is how do you handle triggers to trauma that might arise from applying those participatory research methods and also in reintegration? And that could be to both Dr. Mugumya and Damon.
Perhaps I could start on that. We were also aware of that possibility, and within the research partnership that we built before we began the research, and actually even when our research was taken through the ethical review committee, those are some of the issues that came up, and we already had a key actor. This is an actor, an NGO who partially also works with the AfriChild in psychosocial support interventions. And they were ready on standby to provide any support if at all we encountered such challenges during the research. So, but fortunately we didn't encounter any psychosocial issue resulting from the research activities. This is, the organization is called TPO, which is specialist in providing psychosocial support to everyone, including situations that emerged during the research that such an action would be taken. So they were just a call away in case of any issues arising during the research. They were ready to take these up as part of the research program arrangement.
Thank you, Dr. Mugumya.
Well, for me, I would say the trauma is in two phases. The first phase of trauma is with the children, And then the second phase of trauma is with my staff, that the social workers who are engaged in the counseling and in the tracing and they're in the resettlement. The trauma for the children is definitely at different levels. Every child is unique and every situation is unique. And so we handle it at that unique level. And we are able to have a team of social workers who use a counseling system that is able to help the child identify what the issues are. And we work through in identifying and ensuring that the child knows that home is safe. And then when we take the child to do tracing, we are able to sit with the family and engage in what the issues that arose that made the child leave to come to the streets are addressed. Now, once those issues are addressed, and then we seem to see that the situation, the environment is safe, the probation officer is involved wherever we're settling the child, the probation officer is involved, the local council leader is involved, and if possible, if not, we then work with the CFPU. If we find that the place is not safe, that it will have more trauma on the child, we don't place the child back. We then bring the child back into our care, and we continue to work with the family until we see that the family has changed and is able to offer protection to the child. So our first action is rotating around the key principle in child protection, in child rights, which is we act in the best interest of the child. We ensure that the environment is perfect for the child to be in. Well, is good enough for the child to be in. The other second trauma that you have is the social workers who go and engage with the families and understand what the situations are, what the child has gone through, what this, right from when they're on the streets back to when they're at home. Sometimes because of the poverty levels, we may not, and because of where we are staying in Kampala and the different places, we may find and say, but this is not the right place. The child doesn't have a bed. The child doesn't have that trauma that we see that, oh my God, the child, we're going to leave the child to suffer. But understanding that that is where the child is, and we need to work with the family and work with what is present and what is on ground. And having to debrief the staff members through the trauma they have gone through, the stories and listening and all that. That's also another channel of the trauma that happens in our case. So it's not just not only just the child side, but also the staff who are engaging with the children.
Thank you so much, Damon. We've gone a little bit over time, but I just want to thank both you, Damon, and Dr. Mugumya for sharing with us today. Timothy, do you have any words to say? We may have lost Timothy. But thank you, everyone. We will be posting this recording, and we will share that link with everyone in case you want to return to this presentation. And this is only the first webinar in our webinar series, so there are more to come, and I hope you will all join us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Have a good day.
Thank you, Evelyn, for organizing the webinar.
Yes, of course. Thank you, everyone.